Good morning. I'm Mario Joyner, Vice President and Sales Administrator for Nevada State Bank. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar titled Insights, IT Security and Cloud Computing. This webinar is presented by Nevada State Bank via nevadasmallbusiness.com. We're excited to have two information technology experts with us today from NetEffect, a Las Vegas-based IT support and consulting firm. Jeff Grace is the CEO of NetEffect, which he founded in 2002. He oversees the company's growth, strategy, and business development. David B. Rounds has more than 20 years of IT experience. As president of NetEffect, he oversees service delivery, finance, and customer service. Welcome, gentlemen.
Welcome. Thank you.
You can follow highlights of the webinar on Twitter using the hashtag NSBWebinar. And without further delay, I'll turn it over to our speakers. So today, thank you again for joining us. I wanted to just open up, and I'll start with you, Jeff. There's been a lot of news of recent identity theft, IT security with some large organizations, and just wanted to get your thoughts on some of the breaches in for those companies.
Sure. So there have been so many, and they seem to be coming with such frequency. I think to some extent we're becoming immune to the news about these breaches. Yeah. But that said, most small and medium-sized businesses, as well as large businesses, are very rightfully concerned about security. There are a lot of things that you can do to protect yourself, and I think we'll hit on a lot of those best practices and things that you can do to help mitigate that risk.
Sure. Yeah, on that concept of immunity on there, it's unless you're directly affected and it hits you at that instant, it's kind of, you don't even think about it so much anymore. Target was hit, and Blue Cross Blue Shield and Sony, and while we shop at all those and even had insurance at all those, the biggest effect I experienced was my son couldn't play during Christmas time because Sony was down.
That's right.
But there's a lot more money and dollars and personal challenges that go on with that. If your information gets compromised, it can be a challenge to take care of it, get your credit back online and that kind of stuff. So security is definitely important.
Well, even as a bank, I know we were impacted. We had to reissue debit cards. So what we did was the period that was identified for that possible breach or what have you, we issued new debit cards. So even there's an impact for companies that are, on the ancillary side of things. So,
yeah, the financial cost in companies all around, as well as personal, it's just astronomical. Mm-hmm. I don't even know how you could possibly quantify all of it.
Yeah, a lot of horror stories there. So I know there's talk of IT security, but also there's the need to protect your data, not just in case of man-made, kind of breaches and what have you, but also for things like natural disasters. Mm-hmm. So do you guys, either one, want to speak on how to protect your information technology in those cases?
Well, sure. So I think it really comes down to, the people, the criminals wanting to steal the data have gotten so sophisticated and it's become so rampant. I think it's really a matter of what do I do to protect myself as best as I can, and how do I plan for recovering from it as quickly as I can if it happens. So in terms of natural disasters, you always want to make sure that your data, so if you're talking about the data to run your business, you've got to make sure that that data is taken off-site somehow, whether it's pushed to a cloud provider or whether you take the media from your data backups off-site, put it in a safe deposit box or someplace like that. If you have a fire or theft or flood or something like that happen in your office, you've got to make sure that your data is protected and taken off-site, and then it's recent.
And then as far, some of the new viruses that are out there have been pretty harsh on our data. So CryptoLocker was a recent virus that's been out, and there's several variants of it. If you don't have a backup, you're in trouble. You're paying hundreds or thousands of dollars to get this virus to unlock or unencrypt your data. Wow. So CryptoLocker, just a little background. You click on a program or a website, or it comes in an email, you click on it, it actually infects your machine and then goes out onto the network or onto your local machine and encrypts every bit of data it can find. So now when you click on this new file, it says, hey, if you want your access to your data, pay us a bunch of money. And they do it in Bitcoins or actual cash. And this has been going on for, I don't know, 6, 8 months. It's been really rampant. But it also happened, it started out as early as about 2 years ago. And if you don't have a valid backup, you're done. We've, unfortunately, as much as we do for protection on our clients, we've had several people we've been aware of and clients that have gotten infected with this. And if it wasn't for having safe computing practices, which included a good backup strategy, they would have not had any of their data left.
Yeah, so much of this, Mario, comes down to social engineering, where the hackers trick the user into executing the program that then infect the computer and the network, right? So they'll send you some very compelling email saying, you know, you've been summoned by the U.S. District Court or something, and then you click on the link, right? It's a phony email, and your computer's infected. So you can have antivirus, anti-malware, a good firewall, all of that stuff. And you know, it's as if you're opening the door and saying, come on, criminal, come on in.
Scary stuff.
Yeah.
And like you said, it can appear to be very legitimate in the presentation of it. So we have to be very, very careful. So I know you started to touch on just a little bit of the risk, but I'd love for you, either one, to expound on the risk as a company of having your information technology subject to breach or compromise.
Well, I mean, it's kind of like you protect your house. You have a door, you then have locks on your door, you then have an alarm system potentially on your house. So you want to do the same thing with your IT security. You want to have firewalls, you want to have antivirus on the firewalls if you can. You want to have antivirus on your machines. But none of that matters for the home or for your computers if you let them in the door. So if you open up the door and let them in, you know, all the other bad stuff happens. And same with your computing systems and your IT systems. So you have to have safe computing practices. You have to know where you're clicking. You have to know what you're clicking, where it's going to. And anytime you can type it in yourself as opposed to click on a link, that's one way of keeping things safe. It's like looking through the peephole, you know, in the door. But the risks are significant. I mean, you think that it can cost you anywhere from, you know, $500 a year maybe, or even or $20 a month or something like that to back up your systems. But for every business, there's a different amount of money that it would cost if you were down for a day, if you were down for 2 days, if you were down for a week, or if you lost your data and could never recover it. You know, you ask to say, you know, what are the risks involved, and, you know, can you quantify that maybe? Every business is different. The scary part is, you know, we have 23 employees, 24 employees, and our cost of being down is significant. In fact, that we have 24 salaries we're paying. But it's also all the lost revenue that we're not going to receive because our employees can't do that work. So I can speak for my business, couldn't speak for anybody else's. They'd have to quantify that out. And the unfortunate part is the cost in order to protect yourself is really small. It's just a matter of being educated enough, or have some provider or some person you trust in IT give you some options of how much it's going to cost to do it off-site, or whether you want to move it yourself and take it off-site. Or go ahead.
It's really kind of comes down to an ounce of prevention being worth a pound of cure, right? So Dave and I go into our clients and give this presentation on safe computing practices quite often. And you know, so much can be done just by simply being aware of these issues. So it's like I tell you know, our clients, you know, when it comes to IT, many people they don't understand it very well, and so they back away and don't really take the time to learn much about it. And I tell our clients that, you know, your IT is very, very similar to the way that I regard many of the professional services that I use, such as accounting and employee benefits and insurance. Is you know, as a business owner, it's still my responsibility to understand enough to make good decisions. And that's really what you're looking for in an IT relationship, whether it's in-house or outsourced, is somebody who can help you quickly and effectively make good decisions.
And if I could take that a tiny bit farther, it's, you know, 20 years ago, you know, when I first got into this business, having an IT plan of any sort, that was just, IT was always just something we had to do, and it was, you know, it was kind of on the fringe, and most of the IT guys just wanted to buy the newest equipment. And, you know, nowadays IT is an integral part of everyone's business. And just like you have a business plan as far as how much you do a budget, how you're going to forecast how much you're going to grow and how much you're going to sell, and you have to have plans for getting, if you're doing raw materials for any manufacturing, having an IT plan and how that's going to integrate needs to be an important part of any business. And that in that IT plan also needs to include the security and the backup. So how much are you going to spend on maintenance? When are you going to refresh your hardware? When are you going to refresh your security? That is an important part of every business plan right now. And I think the biggest challenge for the small business owners today is that they don't have a huge knowledge of IT. They know enough to work in their business, and they don't know where to start on doing that kind of thing. Right. My advice is, whether it's an outsourced provider or a friend or whatever, get some advice on that, because IT can make or break your business. If you lose all of your data for your IT because of a crypto locker, because you didn't have a plan, that's an unfortunate problem for a small business to have, because they're already out there working hard anyway to stay afloat.
Yeah. Now, have you found that the conversation, from a preventative standpoint, in your experiences, have they been better and more receptive from business owners now because of all the news that's coming out with the consequences if you don't have appropriate security?
Yeah, I would say so. I would say it's a bit of yes and no. Many of our clients are much more aware seeing these things in the news, and some small businesses are still, I think, kind of putting their heads in the sand and ignoring the issue. I have a really good old friend who is the head of IT security for a large public, well-known web-based company. And he put it really well when I asked him recently, what keeps you up at night? And he described to me a particular kind of attack. He says, he says, it's my job to go to my CEO and say, here's the risk. How much money do you want to spend to mitigate that risk? Right? You can never eliminate it fully. You can only mitigate and lessen the risk, as well as something that I really recommend that businesses look at is some type of cybersecurity policy where if they have some kind of breach or data theft, that they have an insurance policy to cover that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and put that into some layman's terms, what he was talking about. You can never have enough security. It's the risk. Bring that down to your house. I mean, I like have an analogy so I can see it and personalize it. So for me, I can have electrified fences, and I could have alarm systems, I could have video surveillance, I could have all sorts of things at the house. It's what am I protecting and how much am I willing to invest in that security, depending on the risk I have inside there. Yeah, and how much I can afford, because cost is always a concern, especially in the business side. It's
a really good analogy, and I have a particular kind of deadbolt on my front door, and I have an alarm system. It's a higher end than the usual standard one that comes with a home. And my assumption is that most people looking to rob a home are going to see my alarm system and my locks and probably move along to someplace else. And I think the same concept applies for IT security.
Definitely.
Well, it sounds like even communicating this as a business owner to your employees, who obviously have access to computers and could be subject to breaches, is very important as well.
Absolutely.
So are there some simple 1, 2, 3 things that you could share as a business owner that could possibly protect the overall business from an IT security breach?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that you can do is you can distribute to your employees an internet acceptable use policy that talks a bit about talks about the computers at work being company assets, and they're being there for company use and business use, and what the employee should and shouldn't do. Right? I mean, left with no guidance at all and no rules, you kind of get what you get. The other thing is really talking them through some of the best practices to keep yourself from clicking on those social engineering links that are going to get you infected.
And we're talking about all these external threats, but the reality is the biggest threat is still internal. It's not from the outside hackers and all that kind of stuff. Those are few and far between, and even though you should be concerned as a business owner, the hackers are really out there for the bigger guys. That's their target. They can make the most bang for the buck. It's easier to get into the smaller guys, but they're out for the bigger guys. So for the smaller guys, not the targets and not those big, large companies, the bigger concern's inside. So there are some things that you should do inside your own business. For instance, everyone should have their own password. Nobody should know those passwords with the exception of the owner potentially. And while I'm not legal counsel by any way, shape, or form, even having the owner having those passwords prevents you from having an easy time of saying this employee did X, Y, and Z. Even if you have logging and security policies in place and you think an employee's out there stealing your stuff or doing damage, if anybody else knows that password, now there's reasonable doubt, right? So, but everyone should have their own password. Password should be complex. You know, password 123 is not a great password. Yeah. So, and there's ways on most computing systems, especially if you have a server in the environment, to enforce that policy. So you can't have passwords like that. Passwords should lock out and should be required to be changed every time. Those are probably the biggest things internally that could happen, because what'll happen is one employee will get another employee's password, and then they have free reign to do whatever they want as the other employee. So unless you have locking policies in place and you have reset requirements and you have secure passwords and nobody else knows it, both on the machines and any applications you're doing, then you're opening yourself up to unnecessary risk.
And that goes not only for, it applies both to intentional and to accidental, right? So you have an employee who has administrative access. They well-intended put company data onto a thumb drive, they lose the thumb drive or something like that, as well as intentional, right? So if you don't have your system secured, it's a heck of a lot easier to steal the data if you're already inside and on the network. And that does happen.
Yeah, and you have things like wireless access into for both customers and employees in the network. That's something we can spend probably another 20 minutes on by itself, because there's so many different ways to do it. Mobile devices, whether it's laptops or tablets or smartphones, there's ways to secure that with some policies and protect the company data, whether you use company-owned equipment or employee-owned equipment. You know, we can probably spend another 20, 30 minutes on that. There's some different policies you can deploy and ways to secure those. So if you want to get into that, we can touch on it. But
so also sounds like it's not a great idea to stick your password under your computer either.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to write your password down and stick it under the keyboard on a Post-it note. That's a bad idea.
You know, the easiest thing to do on that is if you change your password, because if you have a business who employs password change policies, when you change your password, write it down to sticky and put it in your wallet. And that way, if you forget it, you know where it is. And then as soon as you know you got it down, get that sticky out of there and throw it away. Yep. That's the easiest way. That's a little tidbit.
On an industry basis, I mean, obviously there's some industries that tend to require a little more security than others. I'm thinking, you know, financial services, banking, healthcare. And so if you are a smaller business, you know, can you speak to what they should do to make sure they've overlaid themselves from a IT
Sure. So for a small business who doesn't have huge resources, they should absolutely be running a good anti-malware program. Okay. So we talk typically these days about anti-malware rather than antivirus, because the things that infect computers have morphed and branched off into all kinds of different things. So we generally lump it into malware.
Incidentally, that includes viruses as well. So malware does. It's not like we're changing it's changing categories.
Yeah, good point.
It's all inclusive.
It's a bit more encompassing. So you want to have some kind of up-to-date, very effective business class anti-malware software on all of your computers and on your servers, which is not very expensive. You want to have a good current firewall with up-to-date firewall definitions. And you want to just have a conversation with your people. That's what we do frequently with our clients, is to come in and talk with them for 45 minutes about best practices around security. And then on top of that, make sure that you have some kind of good regular data backups.
Anything specific to mobile? I know you touched on it just a second, whether it be tablets or smartphones. We talked a lot about, it sounds like, from a desktop, perspective. Anything you want to elaborate from a mobile perspective on IT security that we didn't touch on?
I think, for me, I have a belief that I think the mobile devices and the tablets are becoming one of the bigger security risks for a small business, because especially as a small business, you don't want to go out and buy $800 devices for your employees all the time, or be locked into a contract for a new mobile phone. So it seems like it's so much easier just to do, it's called the BYOD, is bring your own device, is what they say. So they use their employees' devices, which is a very cost-effective way of doing that if you have methods to secure it, and how you can prevent them from data loss. So the great news is the employer is not, or the small business is not forking out a whole bunch of money for these devices. The bad news is that if you're doing all the corporate email on it, or if you're syncing some data down, like using a Dropbox or a OneDrive or something along those lines, now that company data is actually sitting on that mobile device. And should they leave, it's potential that that person could actually, that employee can actually take that data. So if you're going to have bring your own device plans, BYOD plans, then it's important you have an acceptable use policy. It's important you have a computer use policy, and that should state in there that, hey, you can bring your phone and hook it up to our network, and we may even reimburse you for your data plan or something like that, so use that. But we have the right to click a button and erase your phone. And and if you're in the right type of email system or right type of management system for mobile devices, the employer would have the ability to say, this is a lost device, and click a button, and they would erase the entire device. Now, the unfortunate part for the employee on there is if they have pictures on there, those are gone.
Wow.
So, that's the risk, yeah. But I think, like I said, personally, that's one of the bigger risks we have out there as a small, medium-sized business, is loss of data, because our employees are becoming so enmeshed with their personal equipment into our environment. It's a benefit to have the employee checking their email while they're not on the clock necessarily. They're at home and they can keep up to date, but there's also a risk.
Yeah, we had that situation very recently with one of our clients. They had an employee separation, and because of a policy that we had put in place, as soon as we disabled the employee's account, she could no longer log into her personal laptop. And naturally, she was a little upset about that. She brought it to our office, and after talking with our client, they said, okay, well, yes, let her regain access, but simply remove the company data. So it's really a matter of putting sensible plans in place where the employee gets to take advantage of this, bring your own device paradigm, but the business owner can still secure and protect their data.
And again, if you're using the right kind of management system, or depending what email system, like for instance, Office 365 lets you do policies or to sync your phones and devices up there. You could then also enforce policies to encrypt that device and or lock that device. So if you don't touch that device for 5 minutes, it automatically locks. And then if an employee loses their phone or loses their device, let's say it's not the employees being a bad guy, it's they lost their device, then if somebody finds it, they're not going to be able to get a hold of that device. And then you can still erase it. But more importantly, in that meantime, you're not losing any data to some unscrupulous person.
I wanted to move on. Thank you so much. That's great information. Thank you for expounding on it. But I wanted to move on to a topic that seems to be very current and prevalent, which is cloud computing. And that appears to be an alternative for IT security. So just wanted to get your definition for those of us that lay folks that don't know a whole lot about cloud computing.
Yeah, so the cloud, unfortunately, is a really poor analogy for what cloud computing really is. I think to most people, cloud computing suggests that your stuff is off in the ethers somewhere. Cloud computing, simply put, is taking your applications and data out of your office and putting it into onto equipment in a data center. So whether it's Office 365, so one of the core components of Office 365 is Exchange Online. So you're hosting your email instead of in-house, you're putting it on Microsoft's email servers, right? So Microsoft created Microsoft Exchange, and now they offer Exchange Online.
And before then, if you wanted to run Exchange email server, the only way you can do that is have it in your own on-premise.
Right.
So I mean, people have Gmail offline, and that's that's essentially hosted email. But you don't have the full feature set of the standard business application of calendar sharing, all that kind of stuff that's along with Exchange. So Now the alternative is to having it online, which means no technical resources required on premise. You don't have to have equipment for it. You don't have to pay for the licensing for it. Is you move it up to the cloud, Office 365 as an example. And this works for any application. We're using that because it's Microsoft markets that a lot, so there's some sort of knowledge around it. It's an easy analogy. But so they've moved all your email and all your data up into the cloud, and that's on Office 365.
Yeah.
Go ahead, sorry.
There's Office 365 as one form of cloud computing. We launched in early 2011 our cloud platform called MyGrid, Anywhere Computing. We say that the cloud is much more like a utility than a cloud, right? So we branded it MyGrid. And with that, we can take not just email, but all applications and all data from our clients, put it in the data center. With regard to security, so all the same best practices still apply if you're using cloud computing. The advantage with cloud computing is we have very high-end firewalls. Everything is redundant, right? So all the servers are redundant, the storage is redundant, the firewalls are redundant. So the reliability is much greater. And then in terms of security, we spend quite a bit of time making sure that all those resources in the data center are secured. We implement more stringent policies, right? So the clients who elect to go on our cloud platform have to abide by those. So for instance, if they're running their email on premise, they may not have to type a password on their phone or a PIN on their phone to get on. As soon as they move to ours, they have to enter a PIN to get onto their phone.
You know, and that's a good point to separate some differences between why you would run on premise or on prem for the short, and then why you would run in the cloud, or what the advantages and benefits are of each. You know, when you're on prem or on premises, you own your own equipment and you license your software, then you have complete control of everything that happens on that within reason. So you can decide that you want to send 100 megabit attachments, 100 megabyte attachments on your email system. Whereas if you go on the cloud, and there's a limitation, depending on who's providing that service. I think Microsoft's is 25 megs. If you have something larger, 25 megs, it'll reject it. So you don't have that flexibility. And when you go when you go onto the cloud, you have some more strict guidelines that you have to follow. There's probably security practices that you have to follow. There's data limitations potentially. You pay on a monthly basis for that data and that usage. Whereas if you own the equipment, once you buy it, you have it, right? Other than your own in-house expertise or outsourced expertise to handle that. However, the cloud has, it's a reputable provider. And there are several of them out there, including us, but then they have security practices in place. They've invested heavily in security, so you have a little more protection for your data there because you're not required to keep it yourself. There's redundancies involved. Most small businesses, they may have one server there, and if that hardware fails, then they're down. Whereas if in a cloud application, ours or anyone else's, that's a reputable provider, if that piece of hardware fails, it's automatically switched over to another one, so there's very limited downtime, if any. That redundancy can be critical for someone, especially a business who may be 24/7. Even one who's not 24/7, being down for 4 or 8 hours during the business day, it's got a cost to it. Whether you see the dollars or not, it's still employees and employee costs and lost revenue. So the cloud's a very good alternative for a lot of small businesses, and sometimes you need to run some in the cloud and some local. So every business will have to identify that and look through that individually. Again, find a reputable resource in order to help you ascertain that. And there's definitely some benefits, though.
It sounds like it's an alternative to purchasing hardware. So if you're
Absolutely.
a small business and that was an impairment, that could be removed by looking to the cloud versus purchasing the equipment.
Yeah, I mean, it really all comes down, Mario, to making a well-informed decision. And that's really where good IT resources come in, is helping the decision makers make good, well-informed decisions.
Yeah, I mean, a brand new server can cost you anywhere from $3,000 to $4,000 in just hardware and licensing up to $15,000, $20,000 depending on what kind of resources you need or more. Right. You can pay $400 or $500 a month for that in the cloud potentially. I mean, and those aren't exact numbers, but you kind of get the thought process. You could also take that equipment that's $15,000 or $20,000 and lease it. There's several institutions have technology leasing programs. So that being the case, it comes down to exactly what you said: is what is the best for the company? Do they have the capital for the cash flow, or cash flow for the capital, or would they rather do an operational expense every month? And that, then it becomes down not a technology decision, but actually comes down to a business decision and a cash flow decision.
Yeah, I know we touched on email in the cloud, and that's probably, for our audience, probably the most easily to relate to as far as cloud is concerned. But are there advantages to using a cloud for data backup?
Yes, absolutely. So we talked in the beginning of our conversation about off-siting your data backups, right? Getting them out of your office, or not in proximity to where the data resides day to day. So the old style of doing that was you would back up the tape, and somebody would be responsible for getting that tape off-site. With cloud-based backups, the way that we provide that service is we take your data and every night push the data over the internet to our equipment in the data center here in Las Vegas. It provides some phenomenal additional features. So they're image-based backups. We actually make a replica of the server, put it onto an appliance, so we can restore not just a file or multiple files, but the entire server all at once. We can, in a major disaster, so let's say we're doing cloud-based backups for Customer X, and Customer X's building burns down. Well, we have those images, exact replicas of all the data, the servers, the applications in the cloud. We can create virtual servers in the cloud and temporarily have them run off of that equipment.
And in the general concept of it, anytime you can completely automate something and just have reporting or alerting that something's working or not,
right.
As opposed to having to have human intervention where, all right, let's go grab this tape, pull it out, let me go put this in my pocket, let me put another tape in. That person then's off that day, so then the backup doesn't happen. And that would be the weekend, on that Friday when that person's off, that would be the weekend that you would have something happen. You've just lost a week's worth of data, or something along those lines. So anytime you can automate something like that, is beneficial. And it's not that expensive. I mean, depending on the requirements, it could be as low as $50, $100 a month. And it could, if you have lots of data, it can be a lot more. But again, find an IT resource and get some assistance on that. Doing your carry-off USB drives or your tape drives just undoubtedly will end up causing you to lose some data at some point in time, because that device or that tape will be forgotten to exchange or get lost or broken or something.
Right, and then it also comes down to who are you going to have take that off-site, right? So we talked about keeping your data secure. Do I want to trust that responsibility to one of my employees? In the old days, when we did tape backups, I would have our IT administrator put the tape on my desk, and I would personally take it off-site. So I was the one responsible for making sure that it was somewhere else other than inside the office.
Yeah, because if you take that USB drive or that tape drive and it's not backed up properly and it leaves off-site and it gets stolen out of someone's car, that's your whole business. Right. So I mean, there's issues to concern there. Off-site backup, encrypted connection, encrypted at the location it's going to, so nobody has access to it en route or in transit over the internet. No one has access to it when it's actually on the data center, and it's completely automatic. The downside is that you have to pay monthly for it, so it's a little more expensive than you carrying the tape off-site. There's a trade-off for everything.
It's so much better.
I know we spent some time talking about Microsoft 365, but also there's some other applications, cloud-based applications. I know we use Salesforce a lot. A lot of small business clients of ours use QuickBooks, so didn't know if you had any thoughts or wanted to share anything about other applications that are cloud-based.
Well, I think the big point there is with regard to cloud computing. I think a lot of people have confusion about this, that there's really a spectrum of cloud services. So Salesforce is a web-based service, and so it's a cloud application. QuickBooks Online, right? It's a cloud-based service. There's certainly a place and a niche for that. There's also Office 365 where you have Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, Link Online, and then there's what we offer with MyGrid is a fully hosted. So whether you have QuickBooks, all of your Microsoft Office applications, we've got medical clients that are electronic medical records running in that. So it's kind of the whole enchilada. So, and there are certainly places for all of those in that spectrum. So really, ultimately, anything that's not running in your office, it's making a bit of an absolute statement, is most likely cloud-based.
You know, and the trend is in IT is to put everything onto the cloud now. So if you're a business and you're a medical doctor or you're or veterinarian or a lawyer or any one of those, almost all of those applications, your vendors that you're currently using them on site at your office are most likely, if they're growing, are trying to migrate that service up to the cloud. They want you to move all those records and everything up there. Financially, the reason why for them is because now you're going to pay monthly every month, and they get nice reoccurring revenue, and it's good. And financially for you, it can be a good thing because you're not paying exorbitant licensing fees up front, $50,000 a year for this licensing or pay per doctor, but you're going to pay monthly for it. So there's per user usually. So there's some benefits on there, but you have to understand something. When you go to a cloud provider, there's some risks and some of the limitations I mentioned before, but it's really easy to get your data into the cloud. So if you're at a line of business application and you're putting your electronic medical records, for example, and you change from one provider to another, it's really easy to get it up into the cloud. Getting it out of the cloud and switching to another provider is not very easy.
Oh, wow.
You'll talk to these providers and they'll say, you have complete access to all your data, and you do. But you're going to have to most likely pay somebody to help you get it off their system and get it into the next system. Or let's say you want to move it from the cloud to on-premises again. You have to pay somebody to get that data off there. And then just because they give you access to the database doesn't mean that you actually be able to have any meaningful use of that information, even though you still have access to it. So moving to the cloud is not a light decision.
Yeah,
sure. You want to definitely make sure the provider you're going to is a reputable provider. You want to do due diligence on them to check their references, check their customer references, check their even financial stability, anything, especially if they're a smaller environment. But Microsoft's and big companies like that probably don't have to worry about it too much. Due diligence is already done, right?
Right.
But if you're going to an electronic medical records program and you might want to check on there a little bit more into it. If you already have electronic medical records and it's a smaller guy and you're moving to the cloud with them, have they done this before? Do they have that technical knowledge? Do they have the financial backing to do it? So make that decision carefully and know that once it's up there, it could be very good for you. But if you ever want to change course, it becomes a little more difficult.
Well, to your point, I was at a doctor's office just last week, and they had selected one provider for electronic medical records, and they're no longer. So they made that move, and they got all the information up as they were told, and obviously the process worked for them. But they're having that issue now where they have to transition from that provider who's now no longer in business to a provider that is. So
yeah, technology is such a continually and it's seemingly every day, every month, every year. Changes more rapidly, right? So it's something that we as IT service providers have to contend with, and it's something the consumer has to contend with as well, as it's a continually changing landscape.
And don't get me wrong, the cloud is a good thing. It is not a bad thing by any way. I tend to think of some of the worst case scenarios because that's my job, but there's a lot of benefits to a business to it as well. Just make sure you do your due diligence.
Yeah.
Well, I know it seems as though from a small business perspective, there's some layers there, protection, using the cloud and taking advantage of those broader resources that maybe you don't have to worry about it if you try to localize that IT.
Yeah. Yes.
So that seems to be a definite benefit to our small business viewing audience. I'm sure they'll appreciate that.
Yeah, for sure. I would say especially, Mario, for the small business, Office 365 in most cases is one of the most
that's a no-brainer.
Advantageous. Yeah, it's a no-brainer for most small businesses. We're a Microsoft Silver Partner and Cloud Champion. And so we do, on behalf of Microsoft, loads of these migrations to Office 365. It's a very popular thing right now. And while Dave is absolutely correct, you really got to evaluate your cloud, cloud or not cloud, carefully. In 90% of the cases, Office 365 makes a lot of sense.
And to that fact, getting email off the system is really simple.
Yeah.
That's not the kind of stuff I'm talking about. I'm talking about your attorney databases, your PC laws, your electronic medical record systems, your Timberline or construction applications or accounting systems, anything that's more line of business related and more specific. Those are the ones that would be a lot more difficult to migrate off. The general ones like email, they're not easy, but they're not as difficult nearly as doing something like that.
Yeah, no, are you finding that your clients are bringing to you more of these solutions, or are they more reactive to your consulting?
Gosh,
I think it's changed over the last 5 or 10 years.
It's true.
I mean, if you don't mind me hopping in.
Not at all.
20 years ago, my entire job was to educate every person I ran into, because they didn't realize a lot of the risks, and they didn't do that. I mean, Las Vegas was compared to a lot of other cities, was kind of behind, because we were going off the technology that the gaming companies were using. 20 years ago, they didn't have PCs in most of the gaming establishments. So that's changed significantly. I think more and more there are customers come up and saying, hey, tell me about this. I heard about this. Can you ask me a question about it? We still have a lot of education to do. But I saw this advertisement, so that maybe it's not that they're more educated on it yet, it's that Microsoft and other companies are doing more advertising about it.
Create more awareness.
More marketing of it, creating awareness.
Yeah, I would say that our clients are more asking us and bringing us possible solutions, but they still need the help in figuring it out.
Well, I was going to transition to some questions that we've received from some people who registered for the webinar.
Great.
And I'll transition to the first question. My customer database includes credit card information, so I'm concerned about someone stealing it. Can a customer sue me if their information is stolen by a hacker?
Yeah, that's definitely a huge concern, as well as if you're holding credit card numbers, then you're subject to PCI compliance. So yes, absolutely. My understanding, again, not being an attorney, is that you can be held liable for that. There are a lot of things that you can do to secure your data. Many of the best practices that we discussed are applicable to that situation, as well as there's a really excellent solution for that type of problem called data loss prevention. It's a policy that you can enact, whether through Office 365 or through other third-party pieces of software, where you can look for, the software looks for the credit card numbers, and when someone's trying to send something out, you can say, no, Mario, that's a credit card, excuse me, that's a credit card number. You need to contact your system administrator, because I'm not going to let you send that out.
And a little more specifically on that, if you're using an application like QuickBooks, for example, and you put credit card numbers in there, it's handling the PCI compliance requirements on there, which is masking all the main numbers of it and leaving just the last few available so you can tell what it is. But if you actually have some sort of database of your own with credit card numbers in there, you really should consult an expert in PCI, because to my knowledge, you're actually not going against PCI requirements, because you aren't supposed to keep full credit card information in there, even on paper in a lot of instances. So first of all, I would look into that. And second of all, I would agree, yes, there is a risk there, and I think it's a considerable risk, especially if one of your employees walked out with that entire database or something like that.
Yeah, we educate our clients as best we can with just safeguarding that information. So thank you for that.
Sure.
Mind if I move on to another question?
Sure.
Okay. I'm just starting out in business, and I'm on a very limited budget. After I buy a laptop for my business, what basic program should I install to keep it safe without spending a lot of money?
Anti-malware.
Anti-malware.
Yeah, there are several low-cost anti-malware programs out there. I think it'd be best to consult an IT resource or which ones you can do, but you can get them for as cheap as $10, $15 a year, up to $50 a year. But anti-malware is probably the most important. Obviously, you need your Office applications and probably some Adobe Reader or something along those lines. But anti-malware is the most important.
And choose something that's business class, right? Don't download, in my opinion, one of the free antivirus solutions. Pay a few dollars, like Dave said. I mean, you're talking about perhaps $50 a year for something that's business class. It's not expensive.
Makes sense. Makes sense. So what's the best way to have safety when accessing the internet on the road?
Oh yeah. You have to be conscious of the free Wi-Fi locations.
Okay.
You know, if you go to Starbucks, you know Starbucks is a legitimate company and they have their free Wi-Fi there and you can pick that up. But the bigger concern is that you find one that looks like the Starbucks location. And I don't do Starbucks personally, but whatever the normal Starbucks network ID is that you click on, there might be one similar to it that has like an underscore or something in front of it. And that isn't Starbucks. That's somebody else's personal laptop or personal access point they set up, so that you click onto there, you'll get internet. But meanwhile, while you're doing that, they're monitoring everything you're going through. So know the connection you're connecting to.
Yeah, without going crazy and getting paranoid about security, be a little bit suspicious, right? So if Dave and I are sitting next to one another at Starbucks, I could connect to what I think is the Starbucks Wi-Fi, could be running on his laptop, right? So he's advertising Starbucks Wi-Fi. I connect to him, he's going to provide me internet, and then he's intercepting all of my data.
Wow.
And also, I think it's important to put this whole security concept into context, which is Dave, while he's stealing my information, he's not going to then, he's most likely not going to then use that and exploit that himself, right? He's going to bundle all of the identities that he steals, and then he's going to sell it, right? So this whole identity theft and theft of information is an industry, right? You've got people who will steal the data, you've got people who will resell that information to someone else. So just use a little bit of healthy suspicion when you're out there on the road.
Yeah, and in general, I mean, whenever you're on the internet at all, whether it's free Wi-Fi or not, is you want to be suspicious. You know, like I said, not be paranoid, but verify the links you're connecting to. If it doesn't say .com or .us or .gov or .org or some of the main ones that you're going to, they're doing other country codes like .cz and .cn, and you know, if it's going out of the country and it may look like Nevada State Bank, but it's actually got a .cn or .jp or something on the end of it, you're not going to the same place you think. Type the addresses that you want to do if you're concerned, especially for your financial institutions or anywhere you're putting a secure password in that has information for your identity or your financials. You know, it's better to type that in than it is to click a link from an email or from another web page. Now, if you're in Quicken, for example, and you got a place to click and want to go to the financial institution, that's a different story. I mean, you're in a legitimate place, but be suspicious from the outset.
We may have answered this question, but I'll ask it anyway. Some customers have asked me to set up Wi-Fi so they can use it while they're at my restaurant. How can I give them access and still protect them from hackers? Is that simple password protection?
No, I think because then you're allowing somebody. So if I have a restaurant and you come into my restaurant with your laptop, I have no control over how you use your computer or how infected it may or may not be. So the best practice is to have two separate networks, because as a restaurant owner, I'm going to have point of sale systems, right? I'm entering in all kinds of credit card data and that kind of thing. And so I want two separate networks, one that allows my customers to connect to the internet and one that allows me to do my business. Because really that's you're opening yourself up to the entire world. You know, everybody who comes into your place may or may not have an issue with their computer.
And you can do that pretty cost effectively. I mean, you can buy entry-level business firewalls or entry-level business access points that come with the ability. You'll see it on the advertising for, let's say, guest network. So you have an access network or you have a regular internal network and there's one that's a guest network. So if you see that capability on something you go buy at Fry's or Office Max or wherever it is, of course, find an IT resource as well. We can definitely help you out with that. But you can find them as low as a couple $100 to be able to do that, depending on the requirements and how big a location you're trying to service. You might need multiple ones, but just look for something that says guest networks, and then you can separate it out and let even your employees. So here's the point of that.
That's a good point.
Not only do you want your guests, your clients to be on that guest network, but unless your employees have a reason specifically to connect to your internal network and pull data down. So in other words, I'm on a laptop, I need to access the server internally. That would be the reason. But I'm on a tablet, and I want my employees to be able to go surf the internet in the break room. All right. If they don't need to access your network internally specifically, then your employees should be on the guest network as well. You don't want them internally because, again, you don't know if they're going to be infected or anything else like that. You open yourself up to risk.
Yeah, we actually employ that policy ourselves in our business. So we have 2 different wireless networks.
Okay.
We've got the company network and then the guest network.
Okay.
So if you come into our office, we're going to have you connect to the guest network, as well as we connect all of our mobile phones and devices that don't need access to internal resources. Connect there.
And then the practice would be there is that everyone's got the guest network password. Nobody has the internal password except for the IT guy or the owner, and you only put it on those devices. You never give it out. You manually type it in yourself to only allow access to those devices to the ones that require it.
Yeah, for sure.
I have another employee-related question here. My employees have asked if they can use their personal devices to connect to the company while they're out and about. This would be convenient, but I'm afraid it would also be risky. Should I let them do this? And if so, how can I protect my company information?
I think we touched on that a little earlier on there, but
sure.
Reiterate it again. Have a computer use policy or a access use policy. Put it in place. It's something that they should know about. Let them, if they're going to connect to your personal network, my personal preference is if you're going to use your device to connect and pull our data down, then you should know that at any point in time we can click a button and erase it if you are leaving the company or if it gets lost or stolen, which means the employee understands there's a risk that they can lose their own data, like their pictures and stuff on there. So if you put those in place, your risk is minimized. It's never eliminated.
Right.
Yeah, and so much of this stuff, Mario, to me, it can sound very complex. It's our job as a IT service provider in the small to medium business market is to take those huge enterprise class solutions and policies and procedures and mentality and to boil it down to something that a small business can easily implement. So for instance, on the Internet Acceptable Use Policy, we have a template that is very easy for people to use and make their own.
Well, here's another question we have. If I already have bad credit, would it really hurt to have someone steal my identity? What's the worst that could happen?
Wow, it can get worse.
I can say personal experience. My wife's Social Security number was compromised, and on January 2nd, they filed a tax return in her name and got $9,000 back in. Now we always filed jointly married, but they filed it differently and got $9,000 back on a refund filed fictitiously. So it took us 18 months with the help of our CPA and LifeLock in order to get our few $1,000 refund back.
Wow.
So, and that was no real bad things. We just didn't get our few $1,000 refund back. If your identity is taken, it's a painful process. It's it's filing police reports. It's proving yourself to all over the place. It's not about your credit. It's about being able to do anything as yourself again. Your credit's just a small part of that.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, if I've tried to teach my employees about phishing, not downloading things from suspicious websites, etc., but the message doesn't seem to be getting through, do you have any advice on how to convince them that security is important?
Well, the people component is usually the most challenging, as Dave and I know. What I've seen over the years is that most folks, when they get their computer infected, they're kind of embarrassed about it. And so I think it really comes down to having somebody who's knowledgeable about these issues, talk to the employees, and give them some best practices. You know, I mean, a good employee is it disrupts their productivity, and if they care about productivity, then they care about being infected and having these kinds of issues. If after having a discussion with a well-informed person about these issues, they still don't care, then I think you'd have to really evaluate, are they the right fit for your business?
There's certain sites you could block as well. I know
yeah.
There's certain sites we can't, even some of the more reputable sites, we aren't allowed to.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, most of the business class firewalls, the higher end ones, not the $200 ones, but maybe the 500 and up ones, they have some sort of category filtering capability into it, or content filtering capability. So you can say, for example, I know it's a bad example for Las Vegas, but one of the common ones that everywhere else in the country blocks is gaming. You know, gambling sites. They block that. They block adult sites. They block gaming sites. They block travel sites, and some of the new anti-malware programs that are coming out, it's the one we use specifically, it's the new one we're deploying, and as well as some of the firewalls, actually have technology in place where it's downloading constant information on where these sites that are bad malware sites or phishing sites are, and if your employee does click on one of those links, it'll stop it either at the computer level, using the right kind of malware, or it'll stop it at the firewall level, which is another level up, and prevent it. So again, multi-levels of protection on there. I think a business should do that anyway, because frankly, if you're going to rely on your employees not to click something when they're going through their day, it's really easy to get overwhelmed with the amount of work they have, or they're busy in their haste, they click on something. So the business got to protect it from its own infrastructure.
Sure. Well, I thank you for taking those questions. That was our last question.
Okay.
So I thank you for taking time to address those and sharing that valuable information with our audience today. And on behalf of Nevada State Bank, I'd like to thank both Jeff and David for presenting this valuable information. We hope you can apply some of these ideas to help your business safely take advantage of technology to increase efficiencies. Thank you for your time and attention today. If you'd like to see the webinar again or invite others to see it, it will be available later today at nevadasmallbusiness.com, along with links to some of the resources Jeff and David mentioned. Also on nevadasmallbusiness.com, you can find lots of valuable information for your business, including articles on finance, sales, management, and of course, technology. You can also access our archive of previous Insights webinars. Thank you again for joining us, and have a great day.